Everyone should have had a copy of the minutes, and if they've read them so far, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion about the minutes?
I make a motion.
All in favor? They've already motioned it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Steve Biebermitz is,
He may be here. He's going to at least be late. He wasn't getting out until 6 p.m.
okay, and PJ Keeler is
Excused.
excused as a last minute. So my report, we met as a group to discuss the retreat findings, and there were several of us who met. We met for about 2 hours a few weeks ago, and some of the things that we've addressed and talked about of improving the REMO meetings. I think we've done a good job in this area with the new agenda and the limited use of the executive board. We can discuss ways to define it and refine it, but I would put this in the plus column for all of us. We clarified roles and scope of authority. The new bylaws, once adopted, answer the concerns that were discussed, and that was another plus in the plus column. We explored alternatives to our current staffing plan, substantially addressed by the executive director in his 2017-18 business plan, with an opportunity to allow Tim and the committee to evaluate and discuss some additional opportunities for that. In process, how to get more council members involved. We had a lot of discussion about that. The chair's efforts to engage more members of the council are apparent and positive. We'd like some continuation to which is necessary for that. Requirement that the council members serve on a committee needs to be implemented. We've talked about that before, and we would like to implement that and have everyone who is a member of the council be part of at least one committee so that we could have more involvement. We talked about engaging customers, and again, that would be an additional focus with the business plan that Tim would discuss. Planned and organize and conduct a proactive REMO communication plan. Steve is going to talk about that. I'll just continue for a second with strengthening procedures for onboarding new council members and engaging and educating council members, having some type of an orientation and an onboarding for them, and then just doing some more involvement with them with an orientation. We talked a little bit about the mission, vision, and core values. Developing our mission statement is in the early stages, but the retreat left us with a pretty good common framework. The mission statement, vision, and core value is important, but kind of less sensitive, time sensitive than the other areas that we talked about. And again, we met for good 2 hours plus, and I think we accomplished quite a lot. The communication piece, Steve will address, and then if there's any questions and any discussion, we can open that up for discussion. Any questions about what I just said before Steve talks about communication?
Do you want to do the communications now or under new business, or do you like it?
We'll do it now.
Okay. One of the things that we did focus on at the retreat that was in the bucket of things we have not yet done was improving communications from REMO. And so everyone should have received with their board agenda a handout that is the result of the work we did at the meeting. We tried to start moving forward and talk about a couple things. First, who does REMO communicate with? So when we talk about a communication strategy, who are the people we talk to? We came out with the top priority being the leadership of REMO, meaning you, all of us here, and then the member EMS agencies, and you can see there were other high priority and other priority
Who
groups.
needs copies, because I made them like...
This is not handed out tonight. This was in the email that you got the other day. So Anne Marie, Tim, and I have talked about trying to send some of the materials to the meeting out in advance so you don't just see them on the day of the meeting. For example, the finance report also came out, gives people a chance to read them. So we identified who does Remo want to communicate with? And then we made a laundry list of what types of things does Remo want to communicate. And so this list that you got by email has essentially been, was made by all of us as a group. There were about 8 of us at the meeting. Jeff was there, Carol was there, Anne Marie was there, I was there, Dr. Daly was there, Scott Bowman was there, Tim was there. I think anyone I missed that's sitting in the room? Maria was there. Lynn, you were there for part of the meeting or the whole meeting? Lynn was there. So it was a good group of this group. And I sent this out to everyone in advance, and nobody sent me back, no, Steve, your notes don't make sense, you missed it. So I think this is our consensus of our work. So we think we've defined who does Remo communicate with and what types of information do we want to communicate. So we've laid out 3 additional questions that now have to be worked on going forward. How do we communicate now? In other words, doing an audit of our communications, then looking at how effective that we are, and then looking at what are our options for improving communications. And so those next 3 steps are what we would like to do. There's a number of different ways to do that. I'm going to bring forward a proposal tonight in that we talked about this proposal at our meeting, and I don't think we reached a conclusion as to whether everyone was in favor of it or not in favor of it. I'm going to just bring it forward for discussion, and we can talk about whether it's the right thing to do. I've been working with, done this kind of audit for 2 previous organizations I've been involved with. One, the Arc of New York, where I was the CEO, and then the Healthcare Association of New York State, where I was a vice president. What we did is we brought in outside communication firms that did some communication auditing for us. They would audit what we do. They would then so they would meet with the staff to audit what we do, meet with the members to audit what we do. Then they would sort of give it a grade, so to speak, and then they would make some recommendations for us to proceed forward as to what we can do. I have talked to a couple firms, and I actually just put on a copy or a prospectus of who the firms are that I'm going to I can hand around, and we can probably bring this up later in the meeting under new business as to whether we want to go forward and bring in some outside talent. I've worked with, in the past, Greenberg Public Relations and Stanhope Partners. They're 2 people who work in partnership, and they specialize in helping organizations from like ours to larger ones to do communications audits and put together recommendations. So the byproduct of this would be a series of recommendations. We recommend that you take the following steps. And it would be a sort of a list of things. Some of them are things we could do ourselves. Some of them would be things we might need to change our technology to do. Some of the things we might need, for example, they may recommend improvements to how we communicate by the internet, or the website, or our domain name, things like that. So this would not be a implementation plan, but a roadmap of here are the things that to bring back to this board so that the board would do. And the board would be asked to be participating in that. So they would come in and they would first meet with the staff, have a conversation with Tim and his team. Then they would have a conversation with the members of the board, asking you your opinions on where things are and what you think of things, and try and get input from us, and then they would synthesize that into a series of recommendations. So I think now would be a good time for anyone else who was at the meeting to comment on the communication piece of the strategy, and then we can bring up the proposal later on in the meeting.
Steve, do you have solid numbers that you'll be working with when you present it later?
Yes.
Is there, I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I mean, wouldn't that be applicable to any discussion we would have now? And I'm hearing PJ in my ear who said, well, you realize we just adopted a budget and we're like 80 grand in the red with that budget, so.
Well, we're going to talk about the budget in a while too, under the treasurer's report. I'm PJ tonight. So, well, yes, any money we spend will have to be spent in the context of whether we wish to spend it or not, right? This would not be a budgeted expense. This would be an unbudgeted item.
When you guys had your discussions, is there, and I'm not faulting the idea of improving communication or improving means means of communications or somehow improving, let's say, segmenting the groups and how that information gets out. But was there anything identified that would indicate that currently we are poor communicators?
At the retreat, we identified that we have done an extremely poor job of marketing our brand, distinguishing ourselves as leaders in the EMS field in our region, and that our communication within the EMS field is lacking. That was one of the outcomes of the retreat. That's why we came forward in saying that one of the things that came out of the retreat was the need to develop a new communication plan.
Did that, when, and again, I apologize for not being able to remember what the recommendation was from the retreat. What's the goal or objective with
To not do a
that
bad job communicating like we do now.
But,
I mean,
I agree with you, but
Right.
I guess my question is, at the point we communicate better, while we certainly have improved communication, what do you assume we will have gained? Will we have more courses? Will we have more income? Will we have?
So if you read the handout that was sent to you, it said we did two things at the meeting last month, or earlier this month. Number one, who does REMO communicate with, and then we prioritized it. Then number two, we talked about what types of information do we want to communicate. And it lists what we want to communicate out, both administratively, educationally, out to the field, out to the general public. This is what we established we want to communicate that don't think we do a really good job of communicating now. So our goal would be to improve how we address who we want to communicate with and what we want to communicate with to them. And if you have questions, we can go through sort of those answers. But we agreed at the retreat that right now we haven't put any thought into a strategy, whether it be our digital communication strategies, our in-person communication strategies, or we don't have, just things, some of the things that come up. We don't have a newsletter. We don't have a way for members of the EMS field to get updates from us necessarily. We don't have mechanisms for that. Our website is a 1980s, 1990s website in that it's not pushing a lot of information out to people. We don't have a brand. So when you get an email from REMO, it doesn't say you're getting an email from REMO. It doesn't have our logo on it. All sorts of things like that would go into building a corporate communication strategy. Any other questions on it, or we'll come back to it under new business? Or? Okay. Thank you.
Executive Director report?
Well, hopefully everybody has a copy. I'll speak on a couple of the high notes here. I've arranged to hold our annual awards banquet this year at St. Peter's Hospital. They were gracious enough to agree to do that for us. It'll be held on Wednesday, November 7th. I believe the kickoff time is 6 p.m., but I'll advertise that plenty of times notice. I did extend an invitation to the new director, Ryan Greenberg, to attend the September REMSCO meeting. He has not responded back yet. He replied that he needed a formal meeting request, and I thought that was the request I sent him in the first email, so I reworded it slightly and resent it to him, so hopefully we'll hear back from him soon. Summer EMT classes are in the works right now, probably late August, early September start. Both day and night classes, perhaps an off-site class there as well, and those classes will be the new hybrid online format class that we just started here. CLI class, if there's any agencies or reps out here that need certified lab instructors, we'll be holding a certified lab class September 15th and 16th. We held our last CME on June 20th. That was respiratory emergencies. Next one will kick off in September. It will be Tommy DeNovo, Importance of Documentation / EMS in the Law. He always does a great job with those lectures. And I'll bring it up probably under new business too, looking perhaps to bolster the staff here in the wake of Jen Nichols' departure out of QA to hire a data entry assistant to assist Deb Cuffs with the CARES registry. So I can speak to that under new business. Other than that, that concludes my report, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Tim, is there any process envisioned for this new hybrid EMT class style to get feedback from the students?
Absolutely.
On how it goes?
Absolutely. There'll be an eval at the end of the
Okay.
class.
I know some of my, I have like 7 folks from my agency in the class. A couple of them are just stunned at I know that you've compressed the time frame. I think some of them are sort of reeling under the weight of the compressed time frame.
No.
And I think one of the things just to evaluate is, some of them are not traditional students, so they're not used to taking college level courses where they cram you a lot real quickly.
That was pre-advertised, though. One
No,
of the selling points of the class was a condensed summer version for, quote, summer students who
Oh,
are
no,
on hiatus.
I get that, but it's also the only class we had this summer.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that as part of the evaluation process, it would be good for us to get a sense of, do we do all our classes that way? Do we do some of our classes that way? Do we highlight for students that, be careful, this one's really intense, versus the, maybe, think about whether you're better off in the 4-month version or the 2.5-month version.
Yeah, at the end of the
I'm
class.
not saying anything negative about the class, I just
Sure.
know a couple of my students are, feel like the globe is crushing them right now.
Take that into account, and we'll check all the evals at the end of the class.
I think something that's important to that, Steve and Tim, is that there will be learners that will have different success from different programs. And I think that's gonna be, that feedback, and then deciding how we do these courses is gonna be important. There are people that are bored doing a 4-month course. And there are people that were extremely successful in the 3-week course that Lynn did with the Sheriff's Department in Rensselaer County. It's a question of what sort of resources that each one of those individuals can bring to bear to that course, what else they've got going on.
This is a new animal for us. It's the first time we've had the hybrid class here, and coupled with a condensed EMT class for the summer to get kids back to school on time. So it's more of a little bit of a learning experience for us here as well. But we'll check the evals. We'll talk to the students too, and try to find a happy medium to see what works moving forward also.
Mr. Morales, quick question. Last I spoke to Mr. Ruther, he said possible CIC CLI update August 4th?
August 4th, I do not know. I can find out tomorrow. He'll be in. Had I known, it would have been on my report.
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up, because particularly in the summer, people need
Sure.
to plan.
Absolutely. I'll check with Rich. I'll let you know.
Thank you.
So bylaws vote is also under new discussion, so we'll wait until the end for that. Operational reports, Dr. Daly?
Just a couple of quick things. We continue to work with ATRIS, which is the AED registry that we had talked about many, many years ago. Deb has actually given them a significant amount of information about workflow here locally, and then also how this pertains to Department of Health things. In a call with them last week, the one thing that we're holding true to is there will be no local cost to be borne whatsoever for this. There are a couple of different ideas on how this would move forward, exactly how their business plan would then intersect with this. Goal would be that we would have an improved registry at our disposal. The information would be more seamlessly transmitted to the department, so the department would have better access to it. And then if Public Safety Answering Point were interested in buying into their product, they would be able to do a linkage between a cardiac arrest call and the local AED that may be closest to that individual site. This is something we looked at, I want to say, about 7 years ago when it first hit the market. The business model has changed. Originally, there was a cost that would have been borne by REMO. Now, the cost is completely borne by the company, with the idea that they have other downstream business opportunities. I think this has a significant opportunity here to give us a potentially branded AED registry, but at the very least, a much easier way for us to make sure that we get AEDs out into the community. This is products that's already being used in places like the state of Maryland as the basis for their statewide AED registry. So it's got some really good legs to it. CARES, as Tim said, looking to add to the data entry component of CARES. The 2017 cases, I believe, which is not all been entered for Albany County, is a place for us to start. We're now working with the hospitals to make sure we get the data out on their side. This was all done seamlessly to the agencies because we wanted to make sure we didn't add any additional work to folks. Thank you to Carol for walking those we've got on this through some of the data that wasn't easily accessible. So that's going to be very helpful. And Mission Lifeline Stroke, we still have a working group of docs helping to decide exactly how we're going to determine which patients should go directly to an endovascular capable center and which ones should go to more community hospital for TPA first. This is not an easy question and will continue to be rather flexible over the course of the next several years. Endovascular capabilities are getting greater for large vessel occlusion strokes. The TPA window is very small, and the perceived benefit from the endovascular intervention in the right cases is tremendous. The problem is there's a very small number of strokes that are appropriate ultimately for the endovascular interventions. We have to make sure that we don't take too many patients away from community hospitals who would get care that would be adequate for them there, and that we get the right patients to the endovascular center to intervene if they need it. So, work in progress.
Any questions for Dr. Daly? REMAC academic, Dr. McHugh?
Basically what he said. We also discussed adding Tylenol and making Toradol a standing order, but that's going to be passed on to your collaborator.
Thank you. Steve is going to do the treasurer report for people.
Okay, thank you. There's going to be, we have a little bit more into the treasurer's report because we're going to ask there to be an action taken tonight. So you have the treasurer's report. It was mailed out in advance. Our annual budget is generally built based on there being a deficit, and that's what we've done the last several years. And the success of our educational programs generally narrows that deficit down over the year. And so over the last several years, our educational programs have had a surplus of well over $100,000, in some years considerably over $100,000. There's going to also be a surplus in this year's educational programs. Dave, I'm not sure if Dave's here right now. He was here earlier. I think he stayed to answer any questions, but it's in the area of $80,000 to $100,000. However, the budget is built on the potential for us to have a loss. We now have in assets in cash and investments over $600,000, and for a number of years we had focused on building assets. Steve, during the years that Steve Rinaldi was chair, he worked very hard to build financial strategies. In the years that Kevin was chair, Kevin worked on that. Our goal was to make sure that we always had money in the bank, and now we have an extremely good portfolio of money in the bank where we have got well over a year's operating cash in the bank. So from a business standpoint, we have a lot. When we had the retreat a couple years ago, one of the things we talked about at the retreat is it's time to start using some of that money to improve our programs. And we went through a discussion that instead of looking at continuing to get from 600,000 to 700,000, 800,000, 900,000, we should start thinking about what can we use the assets we've accumulated with to improve things in EMS for our agencies and for our providers and for our communities. And a number of projects have come out of that. For example, REMO kicked money into the purchase of the modems for us to be able to transmit the 12 leads. REMO has bought a bunch of new training equipment. This year's budget is not going to come out in balance. It's going to come out probably in deficit. That's what's anticipated. So the treasurer has been working with Tim and Dave because we think we need to transfer some money from our restricted funds, meaning our saved cash and investments. And when we say restricted, restricted means it's restricted by you. It means that the board has the authority to move money in and out of basically our savings accounts. And Tim and Dave have talked to PJ, and PJ has approved, recommended that we transfer $50,000 from our restricted accounts or our savings into our operating budget in order to get us through the summer. Our fiscal year ends in the fall, so we're getting towards the end of the fiscal year. That'll help to keep our cash flow going. I think that Dave and Tim have looked at the budget, and they think that they don't know exactly how all the training money will come in, but they think that's going to be the right amount for now. So essentially, what we're going to ask to do tonight is a motion to transfer $50,000 in cash from our restricted funds to our operating funds. That basically will take that $600 and something thousand and make it $50,000 less. We keep in our investment accounts a bunch of our investment money right now is actually in cash in what's called the RBC. RBC is our investment banker. They have what's called the RBC Bank. We essentially have over $100,000 that's just cash in there. It's not invested in any particular stock or bond or securities. And that will give Tim and Dave the flexibility during the summer to manage us to the end of the year. I think that there's something that I think we'll probably need to do is we've always budgeted conservatively about our revenue. And then we see at the end of the year how our revenue comes out, usually far in excess of what we budget. When we get into the budgeting cycle for next year, I think we probably have to, Dave and Tim have to, when they prepare the budget, try and get instead of trying to budget conservatively, I think we've got to try and start nailing exactly more where we think it's going to come out so that we don't, because if we had anticipated using $50,000 in cash this year, it would have been, it would have built into the budget. We wouldn't be coming midway through the year and asking to make that change. So we can try and minimize doing this through the budgeting process. So in a minute, I'm going to ask, talk about getting a motion for this and answer everybody's questions. Definitely pointed out is that we spent $9,325 this year unplanned on new training equipment for our EMT and other classes. The incentive compensation, last year's incentive compensation was delayed and paid in this year, so that's about $12,000 that came out of this year's budget. That was for an expense that was incurred in a year back before that. So in the long term, that all balances out because the money was in surplus in that previous year. We spent some more money on the CARES registry than we had planned. So those are sort of the things. So maybe why don't we stop and ask for questions that you can give to, more to Tim and Dave. I've tried to explain it, but they can answer the detailed questions.
I asked Dave to come in tonight specifically to answer any of your questions you may have relative to this proposal. What we're looking at is a cash transfusion as more or less an emergency measure just in case, realizing that we're not going to be holding another meeting for 3 months. Dave can speak to it, but we're not expecting to use it all, but what we're looking at as a safety net to hold us over through the summer. It's always tough to budget or project what we're going to take in, as opposed to what's going to go out. A lot of it is steadfast or set. Some of it is unexpected budgetary expenses, so on and so forth. Some of our training, as everybody here realizes, our grant fund is basically stagnant. We haven't received any additional increased funding from the state, and I'm guessing, long before I've been here, probably 15 or 20 years. We keep the lights on by our training programs, our Heart Association, our New York State training classes. Some years we have big, robust classes with great pass rates. We make a lot of money. Sometimes we have the same number of classes with lower enrollments or lower pass rates. It's very hard to predict, and it's almost impossible to predict what we're going to do relative to those enrollments and those grades and stuff. This year, right now, we have a class with about 57 people in it because it's the hybrid condensed summer course with a high passing rate there, that's a significant amount of revenue we'll recoup. Another thing I just did in the past several weeks is I signed a contract with the Capital Region BOCES to supply all their CPR cards. I'm not talking a couple of cards, I'm talking probably 6,000 to 8,000 CPR cards over the course of a school year. That will provide an infusion into there. So what we're looking at right now is hopefully just a temporary transfer to buy us some time over the summer. Dave, feel free to interject.
That's exactly what it is because there's not gonna be any regular meetings during summer, and it'd be very difficult to reach anybody. Instead of having to call an emergency meeting, if we do need the funding, we figured that we would go and take nips in the bud, get ahead of it, and have these funds here continuing operating through the summer until we start getting into our regular operating sessions again in the fall.
And the things that Tim just referenced, we are looking at a operational surplus on training of between $80,000 and $100,000 minimum for the fiscal year we're currently in. So we may, I think it was greater last year, but it's still, that's a lot of money that we earn and deposited by all the training classes. So training is a cash generator, which makes up for the deficit that the state grant hasn't changed in, as Tim said, as many years as any of us can remember. So I'd like to make a motion that we transfer $50,000 from temporary restricted assets to the general fund to be used by the executive director for operations during the summer.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
So you limited it to operational needs of the REMSCO, not for other projects, so on and so forth, correct? Other program needs?
No, it's for the,
That's what you just said, was for the operational needs of the program.
that is the program, the agency, REMO.
Program needs.
Yes, everything we do here. We don't do anything else, it wouldn't be used for purposes other than what is under the authority of our executive director to do on behalf of the agency. And it does not, this motion would not enable a new project or something, this is not, it's still under, still things that the staff is authorized to do, they will do, and things the staff needs permission for, they still would need permission for. This is just enabling the cash to go into the budget.
Would the approval of an unbudgeted expense with regards to the education stuff that we talked about last month require a need to transfer more than $50,000? So if we were gonna approve any unbudgeted expense tonight, let's say $10,000, let's say it was the communication stuff, we were gonna approve an unbudgeted expense of $10,000, will we need to move 60 instead of 50? That's my question.
Probably not, for a couple reasons. Number one, the education, our fiscal year ends at the end of September. I don't think we're, for the program you're talking about, we're probably not targeting doing it right away. So it'll be further out.
That answers the question.
Yeah. And there's still some, the budget is based on, we haven't used up every penny in every account in the budget. This is just to give them the flexibility inside.
Gotcha.
Tim, anything to add to that, or?
No, sir.
Right.
Just one question, since I'm relatively new as far as past chairman. Is there a goal, has there been a defined goal on what our assets should be? I mean, we work to gain assets, but was there ever, we want to have a year's operating, of expenses in savings, a year and a half, 2 years?
The initial goal was a year.
And I had actually done some analysis for us on that when we presented the last budget, and we calculated that we have almost, I think it was like 1.7 years worth of cash at this point, so we've exceeded where we want to go.
And I assume that anything left over when we get back to regular business can be then put back?
Well, anything that's not used in the budget, so at the end of the year, you have a statement of your cash. Your cash changes based on if your budget didn't use all the money in it, it stays cash. If your budget uses more, your cash is less. So our cash has been accumulating for years and years and years, and we rarely have dipped into it now, but we made a conscious decision that, once you reach a certain point, we almost had too much, we're sitting on more than we need to, because we're restricting what we do programmatically at that point. So we're in a different environment. When we started this 10 years ago, there was a view that the state was going to stop funding the REMSCOs and we were going to have to be standalone. That's long gone. So the grant it's not growing, but it's now there in perpetuity. There was a time when we were planning for them eliminating the REMSCOs, and we would have to sort of do it on our own. That was a proposal the governor made when 8 years ago, because when he first ran for governor, he had proposed to do away with this.
Was it seconded?
Yeah.
Linda, you seconded it?
I did,
Okay, yeah, there was a second.
I did, sir.
So this requires a roll call.
Is this
right?
a
Is
roll?
it a
I think
roll
this
call
is
vote
not a
or no?
roll call vote, because I think it could be a straight vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion stands.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for putting up with me trying to explain a complicated thing. And thank you, Dave and Tim, for getting this ready. A second piece that's related to this that I think I'm going to do a quick introduction on, and Tim can talk about for a minute, is the building. At a recent month when we did not have a meeting, but a bunch of us were here, Tim had told us that our lease is coming due. The cost of this building is about to increase. When this building lease was negotiated, it was years 1 through 6, was it, Tim?
7.
1 through 7, the lease, the rent did not increase. But then in year 8, when the lease would roll over for another term, there was going to be a very large step increase of about 30%, or 25%.
Dave, how much exactly?
I have to look at the lease, I believe it was 30%.
30%, okay. And so basically what we were able to do is get them not to do like 3% a year escalating every year, but then they rolled it all up, and then in year 8, they hit it. We're about to hit year 8 next year. One of the things, we're now paying over $40,000 a year in rent. We're paying $3,550 a month. It's close to $40,000 a year we're paying in rent. And that's gonna go up, 30% when we hit next year. Tim wants to introduce to us the concept of the potential for, number one, finding less expensive space before we get that big balloon increase, but also the possibility of us using our equity to purchase a building. And the idea being is if you purchase a building, you're not paying rent that goes, because we're paying essentially 10% of our budget is going down, it doesn't accrue to us, it accrues to the owner of this building. So the idea is if you purchase a building and you pay your mortgage, you're basically building your equity in that building, which becomes a marketable asset should you ever choose to do it. That's a pretty big step for us to do. And so we want to introduce it tonight because we have to, as a body, figure out how to make that decision. Tim and Dave are going to do work over the summer to investigate possible properties for purchase, what it would cost, how the numbers lay out, what are the options for us to continue renting someplace other than this, to continue renting this place. But I think that considering we don't meet during the summertime, or we generally don't meet during the summertime, I think it would be very hard for us to come back here in September and for Tim and Dave to come with a proposal and say, we want to buy, 250 Central Avenue, here's the plan, let's vote on it. I think significant education needs to be done of the board, the council, if we're going to do something like that. And so, as much as asking Tim and Dave to introduce the topic tonight, I think we ought to talk about what we need to know and how to do that for us to be comfortable coming back here in the fall and starting to make decisions. I guess we need to do this by winter, you said, right, Dave?
That's correct.
So we would have to make,
When
so.
is our lease up?
Yeah, what is the date?
December 2018, I don't know the exact date, but it's mid-December 2018.
So if we're gonna buy something, we gotta have to move on that. And I think it would be really important to hear from the members of the council tonight. What do you need in terms of education about this? What do you need in terms of, so that, and this is like any one of us buying a house, right? You run your numbers as a family before you go and you buy your house. It's further complicated that there'll be many decision makers in this room that contribute to this, and we're gonna have to do a cost benefit of purchase versus rent. And so I think that if Tim and Dave are gonna be doing the research during the summer, we ought to figure out a way to get information out to people and questions and answers back and forth, so that we don't get here in September with a very short window in which to have to make a purchase, if we decide to make a purchase, close on that transaction and move. So you guys to talk a little about.
Just a date clarity, so your current lease doesn't end until, I would assume, 12/31/8.
Mid-December. It's actually,
18?
it's, I wanna say it's like December 11th, December 12th, somewhere in there, based on when the lease was signed, 7 years out from there. It's mid-December of 2018.
What's the time frame that you have to tell him yea or nay?
I'd have to go look at that, Jim. I do not know. I know we had initially a 6-month out clause in there
Yeah.
for basically either side. I'd have to go back, look, and see if there's any other specific terminology in there stating that
And again,
notice.
my concern is just the urgency associated with, on January 1, are we automatically paying 30% more if we don't do something
well,
different?
If we sign the lease, we always have an out. Even if we sign the lease, we always have an out. It will take a period of time to realize that, but we will always have an out. We have 3 options: re-sign the lease and stay here. I think we have wiggle room negotiating wise with this new landlord. That lease was signed with an old landlord. I think there's a lot of negotiating room there based on the occupancy rate of this complex here. He's also, if we sign that lease, obligated to make certain capital improvements, new carpet throughout the building, painting, updates like that and stuff. So that's one option. The other option is to try to find another place and rent it. I'm not a realtor, but this is probably Class C space, maybe D space. I don't think we're going to find anything cheaper with a layout like this and the square footage we need. And obviously, the third option, which Dave is a huge proponent of, is purchase our own building. You purchase your own building, you're not paying that money monthly to somebody else. You're building equity within the organization. So those are 3 things we need to consider over the summer. We've already looked at several different properties, 3 or 4 different properties. We will continue that search. I don't think any of them were the ideal properties, but they all could have worked in some way, shape, or form.
Those were rentals you looked at?
Those were, at least one was purchased, Dave, or were 2 of them purchased, another one was a
2
rental?
of them were purchased, 1 of them was leased.
Yeah,
What municipality were they?
right down the street, Colony.
Okay.
I'm looking for a specific geographical location to make it convenient for everybody that sits around these tables as well, somewhere close to the highways. So that's probably Colony, Guilderland, or Albany.
Tim,
Yes,
has the issues that the executive board dealt with back during the winter with the lack of heat and the lack of air conditioning? The other night, you said there's 60-plus students in here. It was pretty gosh darn stuffy by the time we were
yep.
leaving.
They've been rectified. We have a new AC unit out there that's hooked up now. The roof had a temporary repair. The roof will undergo, at least he's telling me, a new replacement this summer. So yes, all those problems have been corrected. So maybe over the next couple months, look for updates from us. But these are things you need to take home and decide, or take home and think about, and ultimately decide upon. Is, do we stay here? Do we lease another property, or do we go out and buy a house?
I think I'd like to see potential properties for sale. Not necessarily just here in Colony, but Colony, Albany, Guilderland, like you said. The fact that we don't pay taxes on a piece of property that we own, property taxes, means that we can probably look in an area where the property values might be slightly more than than if we were having to pay taxes on top of it, you know, like if we were a regular homeowner. And I mean, just my own 2 cents, we got a lot of time, a lot of invested in this place here. I would think that comparing that with maybe a potentially renegotiated follow-up contract as opposed to going to look for another piece of property, which is probably gonna cost us the same. I mean, maybe one comparison to make sure that we're in the right ballpark, but, you know, the prospect of moving all of this, just to do this all over again when another contract runs out, I tend to agree with Dave. I think we're probably on the same page. If we had bought property 7 years ago, never mind 20 years ago, what position would we be in now? Financially, we'd have a piece of property that has substantial value, that, you know, we're not throwing money away at every month, so.
I mean, I think what Tim is talking about doing makes a ton of sense in terms of the stuff over the summer. My only concern, or only comment is, as Tim referenced, the occupancy of this building, and I realize a bunch of the times when we come here, you know, it's dark, so you may not be paying attention to the non-illuminated signs, but just up and down this road, if you go a mile in either directions, those available signs out there are not because, you know, somebody just built a new building and they're looking for people to rent space. You know, the way people use office space is changed dramatically from when we came here. So again, he probably wants us a lot more than we absolutely have to stay here. So again, I'm just saying that from the point when you have to negotiate it just because somebody said you need 30%, I wouldn't even start anywhere near there.
Yeah, I
So,
wouldn't, yeah.
I'd like to make 3 suggestions of things to be done over the summer, and I want to make them very concrete because it'd be real easy for us to say, Tim, go do this and give us updates over the summer, and then all of us to sort of not be paying attention and get here in September and be not ready to make decisions. So I want to suggest 3 things. First of all, I think Jim asked some really good questions, and I think, Tim, you should send out to everybody our obligations to this current property. On what date you have to make a decision if you're not renewing. If you decide 6 months from now to walk out, how long do you need to walk out? What is our expenses? So we know what our out is, both time-wise and money-wise. So we know that. I think that's something everyone should know. The second thing is, I'd like to suggest that you and Dave prepare some scenarios for us that we can compare financially. Number one, the continued occupancy in this building at the rate that is in the lease. Number 2, the continued occupancy of this building at maybe take a guess at what you think you could negotiate. Let's say, you know, that you got the 30% down to 15%. What would that look like? Then maybe a third option, which is look at some of the properties that you've looked at, pick 1 or 2 of them that you've looked at that you think are the good office space. Give us a financial analysis of that. And then also give us a financial analysis of what it would be to buy something. You know, pick the price range you're looking at and show us. Realizing none of these are concrete offers, but it's an illustrative analysis. If you can prepare that analysis, then the third thing I'd recommend is you have a workshop for the council over the summer. You know, pick the right time, and I realize we may not all be able to be here based on vacations, but for those of us who can come, we should come in here, have a workshop on where you guys put up, and I don't know if you want to have a real estate agent, you know, that you're working with come, or if we need to have, you know, whoever professionally can help that out for us, do a comparison of the stay, negotiate, move, buy, that we can all see. That way, if you come back to us with specific options, we'll have all worked through those 4 potential scenarios, and we'll be well informed to be help you make decisions.
Could I ask to maybe add one more thing to that?
Oh, please.
And that would be, could you come up with a list of properties that we could buy that would work? Something that it would meet your needs, square footage, not be a ton to rehab, but something that we could buy. Because the reality is, if we decide in September we need to move, that's not a lot of time to get things done. But if over the summer you can actually come up with a solid list of things that are for sale and that would meet the needs, so that, quite honestly, I think the shock and awe is over with I think you just need to say, this is what we can do, here are the cost analysis, and here's a list of properties that we could move on right now, and literally by the time the winter hits, we will have been moved out of the situation altogether. 'Cause
Absolutely.
I think buying is a much better option probably, and I think we should be prepared to move on that quickly if we need to.
Dave?
Question for the board. Obviously, these properties rotate in and out all the time. What sort of time frame should we be looking for? Should we be looking to bring you this information in 1 month, 2 months, when you meet again in September? If we do find a property that you all decide that you like, should we be ready to move on the property?
Well, I believe Steve addressed that when he said, if you and Tim put together the scenarios and the information needed, then a workshop should be scheduled over the summer.
I would almost say that, I know
I don't
that
think
we
you can
don't.
wait till September.
I don't know when you guys could be ready, and this is a lot of work, but we could do it at the date that we normally meet in July, when we tend to postpone that meeting. That night could be
Quite honestly,
a
if you
workshop.
get a property that you think is exactly what you want, call a meeting, get the quorum,
Right.
let's vote on it.
Right.
You know, and but you need to have that analysis done and
Sure.
out to the members so that we can actually
Right.
read it and see if it's a logical progression. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
What we'll do then is, we'll go and prepare a couple of different scenarios. With lease versus, purchase that's available that meets our needs, do a cost analysis for each option. Let you have an idea of what we would be getting into, with each type of option. And then if there is something ideal out there, we'll go and, make the notification to everybody that it's something that we should probably act on very quickly.
Yeah, but I think doing the education first is a really good thing to do. If the ideal property shows up, like Jeff said, you should bring it forward. The other thing I think that might be helpful, and I hate to keep adding ideas to it, but I mean, this is like an investment of, most of our assets, so we have to be really careful, is, you had said that meets our needs. I think you guys should put together a list of what are the factors that you would use in evaluating whether a building met our needs, and email it out to the council for comment. So like one of the things you said is it should be near the highways. I'm sure that council members might have some input for you, because we all come from 6 different counties and different perspectives, what meets our needs. So, when you buy a house, you figure out how many bedrooms you want, how many bathrooms, all that stuff. Maybe we should have you put together, this is what we are looking for in a property. Share it with the council members for feedback, so if people have ideas they want to add to it, or jumble around with to make sure that it meets everyone's needs. That way it'll be easier when you bring a building forward. You can say, this is the list of stuff we look like for, and this property has got it. Or this property doesn't have it, Because sometimes you're looking for a 4-bedroom house and suddenly you fall in love with a 3-bedroom house, and then you're trying to justify why you're gonna buy the 3-bedroom instead of the 4-bedroom.
A lot of work that might be worth it.
So,
Just
A
another
breakdown
comment.
too, Tim, what's included in the rent here,
Sure.
what services, and
Oh,
make
yeah,
sure we're comparing
definitely.
apples to apples.
should definitely include in the analysis utility
Right,
costs, snow plowing,
Right, what-
how much parking, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, whatever realtor you guys are dealing with, more than likely, they would get this for you, but it probably doesn't hurt to push them a little bit.
Right.
Even if the-
For a good realtor to deal with, obviously, we've had some people show us buildings, but they really haven't met our needs as far as what we are looking for in a realtor. If anybody has a suggestion, we're certainly willing to listen and perhaps work with that individual with the needs.
And actually, what I was gonna say was, more than likely, you're gonna be looking at a vacant building or a building you're gonna purchase, but at some point in that building's recent life, it was a for-rent place, and the guy that owned it was actually deriving income from it. So somewhere, hopefully not too far dismissed from where you are right now, there should be a profit and loss statement or some kind of a performance that lists all the stuff like you just mentioned, which is
you know, what are the upkeep, what are the utility costs, what does it cost to plow, mow the lawn, all the rest of that stuff, and that should be in that pro forma. Again, if it's 3 years old, then it's, you know, stretch it a little bit, but it would, again, push whoever you're dealing with, even if you're just looking at a building and it's a realtor that's there, say, do you have a pro forma where I can look at, or is there, you know?
I have a question. Are you suggesting a building that would house Remo and Remo only, or are you suggesting a building that would house Remo and you would be able to rent out other space in that building and scale the operation?
Well, I was actually gonna bring that up, whether or not you wanted to become landlords or not, but I figured I'd hold off until we found a property that may, you know, offer that potential. Yeah.
Their store and something.
Dave and I discussed that as well, but see what we can find, and if something out there is like that, I'd definitely bring it back to you for your consideration.
The other piece that we have to consider, you know, it's not a slam dunk that when you see a building that you buy it. I think the other thing we need to have in this analysis when you bring forward properties, you know, what's the age of the roof? What's the age of the HVAC system? There's a lot of appeal to being building owners. There's also the, you know, right now, when the heat breaks, Tim just calls someone. When the roof leaks, Tim calls someone. I mean, they may have had to fight a little bit to get things fixed, but, you know, we just have to recognize if we're gonna become building owners, if the air conditioning blows and they tell us it's a $20,000 compressor, we're buying a $20,000 compressor, right? It's not gonna be that we're gonna, you know, we're not gonna be alternatives. So we have to be really ready to take that leap and understand what the risks of ownership are.
Please understand, though, that most of us have had kids go through Little League, be prepared to work the concession stand. We may not have to sell hot dogs next door.
Well, we can open a restaurant.
Fundraiser. Go fund it.
All right. Tim, anything else on that? So.
No.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Steve.
Can I ask one question on, as long as Dave's here, he's probably the best person to answer it, just as long as you're under the treasurer's report. We had mentioned some time ago about getting a similar report as this, but from QuickBooks instead. Whatever happened to that? I mean, maybe Dave's better to answer that.
QuickBooks report, if that works best for you. The reason that we have been doing this format of the report is just for readability and ease of understanding for everybody. But certainly what I can do is QuickBooks trial balance and profit and loss statements, if that would work better for everybody.
I think what we had concluded was, and maybe the message didn't get communicated, was that we had asked to have for the next month, so it could be September, that you prepare the report in both QuickBooks.
Okay.
And you prepare the report the way you traditionally do, so the board members could look at it, and then you could be able to answer questions, and the board members could decide. So you can tell us what the differences between the two are, because for a couple months now, people have been asking, can we look at it in QuickBooks? And I think PJ was gonna ask you to give us both so we can see the differences, and then the board can decide what they want for the long term.
Yeah, I think there's a certain segment of the group here that uses QuickBooks on a regular basis and are accustomed to seeing that kind of a report.
Okay.
So, I mean, just for me, it would be easier to read than this. I have a tougher time with
Very
this.
QI?
I have nothing from QI.
Did the committee meet?
The committee did meet. I did not get a report from Deb. But I can get one and forward it to everyone.
Should be from Tom, shouldn't
And Tom, Deb, Tom.
That would be really
Deb
good, because
takes
that's a
the
pretty
minutes.
important committee to meet and not have a report. I think maybe it could be sent in writing to the council.
No, we have a chair.
CON committee?
Nothing currently before the CON.
Under disciplinary actions from the DOH, as a result of a DOH investigation, Alexandra Serrano from the Bronx had her certification revoked for violations of Part 800.16. Under course applications, Western Turnpike Rescue Squad EMT Original starts on August 28th, with a refresher starting on August 25th. Colony EMS EMT Original Day starts on September 10th, and the refresher is September 8th. Colony EMS EMT Original Night class starts on September 10th, refresher September 8th. Any questions about that?
Just
skip that Bayside one, I don't know if you have to read it.
I think you have to read that into the record.
What did I skip?
The second.
The second one under
disciplinary
disciplinary
Bayside
actions?
one.
Bayside, New York.
As a result of the DOH investigation, the Bayside Community Ambulance Corps, Bayside, New York Agency Code 7338 had their certification revoked for violations of Article 30, Section 3012.
It's not on my.
Great job, Jeff.
You're using the draft, you're using a different one than I am.
It has now been read into the record.
Sorry.
Jeff got it.
Good job, Jeff.
It wasn't on the piece of
Yeah,
paper sheet, it really
not-
wasn't.
It was not what I was reading, I apologize.
It must have come in at the last
You didn't
minute.
have the latest edition.
I did not, I did not, I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me. So, in addition to the course applications, then Hudson Valley Paramedic Night, that was not on mine either. Original starts August 27th, EMT Day and Night Original starts August 27th, and Paramedic Day Original starts August 28th. Any questions? Okay. Under EMS Council, Steve?
I've got a finance committee for that.
Go ahead.
So this is the finance committee report, which is, PJ's listed as the chair, but I'm actually the chair of the finance committee, and he's the treasurer, I'm just subbing for him. You should have gotten tonight a handout that said suggested key performance indicators for realization of 2018 incentive compensation. We do have an incentive compensation program for the staff that generally gives a percentage of the educational surplus that's allocated to the staff according to their percentage of the payroll pool based on our performance. For many years, it was based only on our financial performance, and 3 years ago, we started basing it on our metrics of customer service. This year, we asked Tim to help us build out those metrics, rather than have the council make those metrics, have the staff make those metrics. Tim began meeting with the staff about 2 to 3 months ago. They came up with some metrics, they forwarded them to me, I gave them some comments, they went and worked on some more, then they forwarded them to the finance committee, and now they're coming before you tonight for approval. So, the way this works is 50% of the incentive compensation funds will come from from pure educational surplus. The way, I'm gonna have a motion later that talks about the specific amount, but traditionally, we've done 12% of the educational surplus. So if our educational programs come out ahead $100,000, there's $12,000 available for incentive compensation. Of that, 50% would be allocated by just pure, $6,000 would go out based on that we made that much money. The other $6,000 would only be distributed to the staff if they met certain performance goals. This handout is those performance goals. So number 1, credentialing. Number 2, in medical standards. Number 3, meeting participation and regional presence. Number 4, customer service. These are goals that were developed by the staff, shared with us. If you see on the second page is a breakdown of how it will be measured. So not only has Tim developed the goals, but he's developed how they will be measured so we can determine at the end of the fiscal year, which ends at September 30th, whether or not we met those goals. So I'm bringing this before you tonight as a motion for us to adopt the performance indicators for the 2018 incentive compensation program that would be for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2018. This is, of course, subject to any amendment and suggestions by the members of the council, but this has been, bringing it forward from the committee satisfied that it's good work.
Can I ask just one question? And I have nothing, it's not about the compensation itself, but are we making sure that whatever funds we derive are meeting the DOH requirements about putting it back into your programs, either in salary or equipment and so on and so forth? Because that just isn't unlimited cash that you can spend. I could be wrong on this, but that meets a very specific criteria.
I cannot answer that question. This incentive compensation program predated my time as an officer.
I just know what I have to deal with when I take in funds from DOH and what I have to document.
Well, this is not
Yeah,
DOH funds.
this is general
Okay,
fund,
but
this is
It
nothing.
is reimbursement to the courses, which, are we considering that profit? That's my question.
I I think the best thing for us to do is to continue proceeding, however, to check with our council on this to make sure that, you know, it doesn't hurt a couple years down the road to go back and say to Tim or Terry, does this meet all the criteria for something that is allowed to be done? And come back to you if there is anything we're doing that we should need to modify. Because I can't answer the question tonight, and there's no reason why we shouldn't check, and if we get the green light, we keep going. If we get a yellow light, we come
We're
back
fine.
and say.
I just want to keep us out of trouble.
Right, so, because I presume that when we first did this, it was reviewed by our
Yeah.
council, but, you know, I think that was of way back.
I'll make a motion that we receive it.
I'll second.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just for clarification, on the meeting participation and regional presence, is that all REMO staff will attend these things, or is this just?
No,
Tim?
it's designated remote staff. I
Okay.
can't send everybody to every meeting, but what I
That's what I
did by
was
putting
getting
this down here is to try to assure that we have staffers present at outlying meetings.
That's my point,
Yeah.
okay. So just REMO staff in general will attend 75% of all quarterly
Correct.
CMAX meetings, not, okay,
Correct.
just wanted to make sure.
Just a question too for Tim. Are you guys comfortable with how this thing whole plays out? I mean, granted, we're kind of bonusing almost with a calendar year, but we're actually using income from a fiscal. Does that work with what you're doing? I mean, is it an appropriate time frame? As an example, you're actually gonna bonus somebody on a course that occurred in the fall of 17-ish, or maybe even summer of 17, because you're not gonna see the revenue to actually create this projection?
Well,
I mean,
we've
does that
had that
make sense?
issue in the past. I've actually gone to this body to explain, like, we're doing adding up our incentive comp now. We realized money then that should be paid now because of accounting or fiscal year timing and so on and so forth. It ended up on an opposite side of the budget. I don't have any issues. I don't think the staff has any issues with the way this plays out like this.
We finally got a current that we will, if we can now pay this money out on September 29th because Dave will close the books for the year, and we will actually pay the money out in the year, not pay it out in the subsequent year. Last year, we were paying out the year before's bonus in that year, so we actually got ourselves back on time.
I don't know, I think it makes a ton of sense. Again, you know, I think it makes sense to have, you know, some degree of customer service survey out there, but the problem is if the responses are minimal, you know, what statistical value do they really have? And I think reducing that to 25% makes a ton of sense.
Well, that's why we tried to think of a couple different indicators, some of them based on customer service, some of them based on office staff performance as well. Try to balance it out a little bit.
Can I ask one question? Because there's a meeting that's not included in here, and I know Deb goes regularly to the ARMs, the neighboring councils. You guys all, I mean, just trying to give her credit for what you guys do.
No, I had the intentions of putting that in there. Yeah.
Probably a flat number as opposed to a percentage, though.
Yeah,
To make a certain percentage of neighboring agencies.
Well, yeah, and you know we make that effort now. Deb goes to
No, I know,
the
and that's what I'm
surrounding.
saying.
You're right.
But it's not recognized, and I know
Nope.
she does it, because
But I can add that into one of these sessions.
That
Yeah, it was
in
my
the
intent
Mountain
to.
Lakes, yeah.
It was my intent to add that in there. So.
We gotta vote on that.
We gotta vote on it.
There was a
So I
second
guess
motion.
it's a seconded motion, right? So we can just,
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the second motion is to put in place the structure for the program. And I think everybody has this, it's a half a sheet of paper, and I have a copy for Gary, so you can get it into the, this is just to put into the policy, the exact policy we're using, so that in September, when they start to close the books for the year, the payment can be processed. So the motion is the incentive compensation pool for fiscal year October 1, 2017 to September 30, 2018 will be 12% of the educational surplus. 50% of the incentive compensation amount will be derived from 6% of the educational surplus in equal amounts for the following key performance indicators: credentialing, CARES registry, meeting participation, and customer service. The remaining 50% will be calculated as 6% of the educational surplus. So I will make that as a motion.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Just-
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion stands.
We did it on time this year. Whew. All right, thank you.
Steve, EMS council report?
The EMS council has not met since the last time that we met. Tim has invited Ryan to come here, and Ryan's been traveling around the state. The only thing to report from the EMS council is we have close to 700 responses out of 1,800 agencies to the workforce survey. The analysis is going to be starting in the next couple days, and it really will provide us some valuable information on the shortage of EMS personnel, both in volunteer and paid capacities, and hopefully that'll be a valuable tool for us going forward in trying to talk with all interested parties on what we're going to do about not having enough EMS personnel to do our jobs. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Nurses report, we met on June 7th and hosted it at Saratoga Hospital. We discussed the nursing shortage, which seems to be a challenge for all of us. Ellis reported that they had 20-plus nursing vacancies open, so we all discussed the challenges with that and how many nursing agencies we have, so agency nurses. Saratoga, we have 4 open positions, all in the night shift, and so we have 2 agency nurses, so trying to supplement that for the summer, and we're actively recruiting.
We have 20 new grads in the residency, so next year we'll be looking better.
That's right. Albany Med has nursing grads as well, and so we talked about that program, and St. Peter's is also taking the grads, so hopefully that'll, but that internship program is about a year, so you're right, he said it takes a full year for them to kind of get onboarded and ready to perform. We talked about the one-for-one exchange. There were really no issues with that. No one reported anything. I had an ongoing discussion again about the behavioral health patients. That's always a big discussion, and how we can manage the patients, and the increased staff that it takes to really manage them, because we really have to follow the DOH and the CMS guidelines of that one-for-one. So that's a real challenge, because if they're suicidal or homicidal, it has to be a one-to-one set, and oftentimes there's not enough of resources to do that. So it's challenging not to have just one person sitting with more than one patient. So had a lot of discussion about how that's being managed. We were fortunate enough at Saratoga, we did just get an additional 1.4 FTE added to our staffing for our crisis evaluators. So now on the evening shift, we're like 2P to 10P, where our highest volumes are. We have a second crisis evaluator. We've had 500 plus behavioral health patients from year to date, from 2017 to 2018, just at Saratoga. So I know they didn't have the numbers at the other hospitals, but they really are increasing exponentially. We did add, about 3 months ago, I think I reported out, but we added 4.8 FTEs for our techs, really just to sit with the behavioral health patients, because we were just pulling techs off the floor, which is a challenge for all the hospitals. So had a lot of discussion about that. And then we discussed the turnaround times in the ED with EMS, and we seem to feel that that's gotten better. I mean, I certainly can see what all of you guys think, but they said the numbers have decreased. I think Saratoga and Albany Med, or I'm sorry, St. Peter's and Albany Med, it was a challenge before, and there were some high numbers of the EMS having to wait a lot of time waiting for them to turn over the patients to the nurses. But they did say that seemed to be better. Any agreement or disagreement with that? I said I would kind of bring it here and see if you guys felt any different. What was that?
We do it for like once a year, every 6 months, and pull that data.
So,
So you don't have your.
yeah, and we pull it at Saratoga, I'm not sure if it is, but I can bring that back and see if we can all do that, and then we'll report it out here, that would be certainly good.
Well, we can report it out from the
From-
US chart from regional data.
Okay, okay, good, and you bring that here, will you?
Yeah, we didn't include Saratoga before because we looked at, Ellis, St. Peter's and Albany,
Okay.
because that's who we got complaints about.
Okay.
You were lucky that laptop that way.
Yeah, and I think our turnaround in time is pretty quick. We don't usually get too many complaints about it, but certainly it'd be good to get that data. And that was pretty much our discussion. Any questions? Okay. Is anyone gonna report for the MCI for PJ? Did he ask anyone to? No? No report?
No, there is none. If you notice, I starred, I have stars there and a report next to it. Those are the people, when I polled everybody for reports, those are the people that did reply back.
Okay.
So the ones that don't have report next to it, unless they're gonna bring something up from the floor now, I don't think I'd expect a report from them.
Okay. All right, membership, Lynn?
The last time we were together, I'd announced that there was an opening at the for an at-large seat. We had also received an application for consideration by Dean Romano. If I remember correctly, I had to leave early, but I think I read it, that we tabled discussion until this month. Is that everyone's?
I thought we tabled until we got the new bylaws in place.
Correct.
Right,
Well, that's why I'm asking you. Yes?
I agree with that.
Yes.
Okay, so with that said, the bylaw, or not the bylaw committee will never meet again. The membership committee will start meeting over the summer to address the documentation that the bylaws committee thought we needed and be able to bring possibly something back during the September or October meeting for review by the council members, review and approval. Membership committee meeting, people? Scott? Yeah? Jeff? Yeah? All good? Okay, does anyone have any questions? Do we need to do anything different? In a little while, we'll talk about the bylaws, but since Anne Marie hit on it, I'm just gonna remind everyone that, with the new bylaws, should they be voted into place this evening, the requirement is that every member of the council will participate in at least one committee. And as chair of the membership committee, I keep track of who attends when, to make sure that members are in good standing. So I would greatly appreciate if you decide what committee you'd like to be on besides notifying the chair, that you also notify Tim, the executive director, Tim and I, so we can keep the list updated for this. Good with you, Tim? Thank you.
Thank you. So there are no other committee reports, we'll go on to county reports. Albany County, Brian?
No, we got nothing.
Columbia? PJ is not here. Any?
And I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't have anything to report. I don't know.
Okay.
See Ken either, so.
Greene County? Aiden, anything to report?
Good evening, everyone. Just for notification, the EMS Council took off the month of July and August, and it was unanimous, surprisingly. That's all.
Thank you. Rensselaer County, Amy?
Happy summer, everyone. We did get a new director for public safety in this county. Jay Wilson is now involved.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
We have a new director for the Bureau of Public Safety in Rensselaer County. Finally, it's been 8 months, so I have a new boss, Jay Wilson. Happy summer. Enjoy your time off.
Saratoga County?
No report.
And Schenectady County?
No report?
Thank you. Under new business, okay, bylaws vote. Lynn, did you want
Oh,
to
yes.
say
So-
anything about that?
We sent out the most recent set of bylaws, which were dated May 21st, down on the lower left-hand corner. May 21st, 2008, there are 9 pages. Does anyone have any questions at this time? If
That was good though.
Workplace violence, okay. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the bylaws as presented to the council.
Is there a second?
Carol seconded.
So the motion has been seconded. Before we begin discussion, are there any members or alternates voting as in place of a member who wish to declare a conflict of interest? Okay. We'll move to the discussion.
When we're done, can we get a nice copy of everything that's current?
Don't look at me.
Yes.
Whoever, yeah.
Yes,
Final.
yes, we
I
can.
And I mean,
emailed it
don't-
and
I
I
don't-
sent it to Mr. Mirabili for distribution.
But it should be,
Yeah, but I mean,
it should list on every page, adopted on
Yep.
Yep.
date. So anytime we pull it out, we always know we have the right version.
Okay, on the bottom of each page, it has the date.
Right, it should say adopted on that date, so we're clear. If we adopt it today, it will say today's date.
Do you want me to add the words? I just want to make sure I'm being correct.
Absolutely.
Adopted by.
Adopted
Adopted
on.
on.
State.
9/20.
Right, and then if there's any amendment, you would change that.
And today's date instead of.
And we have to do 2 votes, right?
We
We did the first one last month, okay, so this is the final.
Please.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Remember, let's get this done, this is important, then I'll add a suggestion. And I'm not saying
No.
you have to send it, Lynn, I just mean someplace, so that Tim or somebody, if somebody wants to go bylaws, click, it's the most recent.
Well, I've been assured by Mr. Mirabili that once this is a done deal, that the bylaws will be found on the website.
And I'll distribute them to everybody.
And not for nothing, in other agencies, we have made people actually sign that they've received them. So I've made a note of it in the new membership paperwork, that we might agree that they saw it, given a copy.
Roll call?
Is there any additional discussion?
No question, Jeff, Scott?
Nothing.
Let me get you the attendance.
I've got it. I did, yeah. So when your name is called, please vote yes, no, or abstain. Les Toomey,
Yes.
Brian Wood,
Yes.
Scott Bowman,
Yes.
Dave Bettini,
Abstain.
Aiden O'Connor,
Yes.
Steve Mercado,
Left early.
Amy Manchester,
Yes.
Kathleen Allen,
Yes.
Kevin Robert,
Yes.
Tracy Weir, Dave Massella,
Yes.
Steve Kroll,
Yes.
Carol Brandt,
Yes.
Lynn Kane,
Yes.
Jim Stairs,
Yes.
Steve Retzloff, left. Jeff Williams,
Yes.
Maria Walker. Yes. And Tim.
Nope, I don't vote.
Sorry.
Oh,
Okay. Can you give us
How many?
how many?
there are 15 yes votes and 1 abstention.
Did the chair vote?
Just a point of order. I think you have to have a reason to abstain, right? As opposed to just, if it's a conflict, then the
No.
conflict should have been
He
declared.
can just
You didn't say
abstain
it was
and
a
then his
conflict,
name
you
is
just said he
listed.
abstained.
So many years ago on this body, I abstained from a CON vote because of what I perceived as an issue. And I was told by our counsel, who's still our counsel now, that that's not how an abstention works. And there has to be a reason for the abstention, not just a, I don't want to say yes or no. So I just wanna make sure that we're doing this the right way. And Jeff's nodding his head.
I made the same comment over here
I
on
heard
the
that.
side. Okay. You heard me.
Yeah, I did.
You can ask Dave if he wants to say anything.
Dave, do you want to say anything?
I don't feel like I have to say anything.
Okay.
Okay.
So what does that do to the vote?
Did the chair vote?
It's a-
Did the chair vote was my question.
Chair can't vote during the.
Chair can vote.
Chair can vote, absolutely.
Chair votes. You're a voting member of the body.
You just couldn't bring it as a motion, that's why I did.
Okay.
So you vote no, right? No.
Then I vote yes.
So, 16 yeses,
Doesn't
one
make it
abstention, no no's.
17 and 1 abstention, or 16.
16 and 1 abstention.
You did it. Passed.
It passed.
Passes.
Carry it.
Motion carries.
Okay.
I didn't hear you.
Motion carries, yes.
For-
Yes.
Can somebody reach out to our attorney and ask that question regarding abstentions and the criteria? Because if this is gonna be an issue where we barely have a quorum and people abstain when I don't believe they're actually supposed to be able to abstain, that is an issue. Could be an issue for future
Yeah,
votes.
we just don't wanna get involved.
Kevin's leaving, so we just lost our quorum, so there'll be no additional business.
It may be, and it's good to ask that question, it may actually be specific to a CON vote, that what Dave did is actually probably appropriate.
Maybe
for
true.
this, And it may just be for the CON.
And I'm not trying to impugn
Yeah, no,
Dave.
no, I agree.
We need to know the answer to that question, should anybody else want to abstain for the future, so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because basically, at that point, an abstention is a no vote. And if you're gonna vote no, just vote no, it's fine. But I think we just need an answer to that
Do
question.
you want me to solve that by simply voting no?
No,
Do you have to go through all this nonsense?
I'd be happy with that,
No, it's-
but I don't know that that's the rule, so.
It's good to have the answer.
We already have,
We're
good.
we already have it now.
Trying to push it, Dave.
This
Just
is
wanna make
painful
sure we
enough
don't
already.
step in the puddle and.
I understand.
Right.
I was trying to simplify life, that's all.
I also vote in the affirmative, I wasn't on the sign-in sheet, I apologize.
See,
Go sign in.
So now it's,
I signed in, he's all.
All right, it's now 17 and 1 is now
get to
7
there, is there anyone in the room whose name I didn't call?
able to vote.
anybody who decided to wait longer than Dr.
Dr. Jagoda.
We still have a quorum
still
now.
Is there anyone else who can vote, whose name I did not call?
Adjourn now.
Tim?
What?
You don't like Dr. Jagoda, his name wasn't on the list?
Is Dr. Jagoda's name on the list?
It's not on the list.
No, I don't think either of our names were on the list.
We should worry
On
about
the attendance
abstention
list?
making this a
No, he's on there, you just didn't, you didn't
sign
sign in.
Yep.
You and Dr. Daly both didn't sign in.
It's the three of us.
on the back of the page, I think
It's a good thing that we did.
Would you like to vote, Dr. Jagoda?
It starts with a J.
Would you like to vote?
Yes. And yes.
Dr. Daly?
Okay, the results of the vote, the results of the vote as they stand,
19.
as they stand at this moment are 18 votes yes, 1 abstention.
Next.
Now it definitely passes.
Final?
No hanging chad?
That's what I was gonna say, it's a Florida recount right here.
All right.
Somewhere somebody's watching this.
All right.
Is there anyone else eligible to vote hiding in the closet?
I don't think you're allowed to ask that.
Okay. Hiding underneath the desks up there. All right.
All right. Continued under new business, REMSCO approval for data entry position to assist with CARES project.
I'll speak to that.
Tim?
Probably not the greatest timing to bring up, the potential addition of a staff member here. But the CARES project is really taking off. We need another person in medical standards to provide data entry relative to the CARES registry.
Is Jen not coming back?
It does not look like she is now.
So it's not like we're gonna spend extra money
No, no, no. And actually, even if with the addition of somebody for the rest of the fiscal year, we'll still realize a significant savings versus Jen
Is this
being in the
replacing
office.
Jen or a new position?
I would classify this, and I'd have to do another job description, but this would be a new job description as however we chose to phrase it, data entry for the CARES registry. Deb simply has too much on her plate. She's here 2 days a week. She's extremely happy with what she does. She doesn't want to do any more.
But would Jen's job be filled?
At this particular time, I'm going to opt to leave it open. I see perhaps down the road that it may have to be refilled, but what we need now is somebody to supplement Deb doing data entry to keep this CARE project that we've worked really hard to achieve in the last several months up and running.
So you're basically asking for permission to establish a new job description that will use existing budgeted staff monies.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And this is what I'm proposing, to bring a data entry person, this person that I have in mind, and I actually have to help recognize Dr. Daly for his assistance. We found very educated EMS provider that's going to be going to medical school that's interested in the position. What I would propose is to bring this person on board, $20 an hour, 8 hours a week. It's $160 a week for the end till the end of the fiscal year. It's 12 weeks. That's roughly $1,920. We have realized savings with Jen not being in there of $20-something thousand. So even with the addition of this staffer and Jen not coming back for the remainder of the fiscal year, we'll save in that office $18,205, and that's with the addition of somebody to help bail Deb out with CARES data entry. So,
The other thing that's important to remember with this is when we initially talked about CARES implementation, we were going to hire somebody else to assist with that as an external contractor. This would be doing it through the office instead, which I think makes a ton of sense, and actually is at a much lower rate than originally we had discussed.
I'll be happy to make a motion to authorize the executive director to fill the position he sees needs or sees fit, and to essentially the hours that you see fit as well. I mean, you're got a huge buffer there between what was spent or what was budgeted and what you need.
well, I talked to Dr. Daly. I've had extensive conversations with Deb. Number one, to make sure she's on board with the addition, and she is. Number two, to make sure the hours that I proposed to you just now would be enough in that position. She seems to think they are. That's why I threw those out to you tonight.
Yeah, and that's why I said, I mean, if you think you need 12, 16, do what you got to do. And that's my motion.
Let's budget it for 16 and then start them at 8. We need to go up.
Can I, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask a question before it's seconded?
I'll second.
Okay, then I'll wait for that.
Any
So we budget a certain amount of money for the year. Is it necessary for us as a body to approve individual positions and their job descriptions? Or is it okay to say that we've budgeted X number of dollars for personnel, for salaries for the year, and the fact that the executive director has chosen to not fill a position and spend the money on either a redefined position or a new position, that seems okay to me. I don't see why we need to make another motion and approve any specific position or title or job description or anything. It seems to me to be within the executive director's purview to hire the people he needs to hire within the budget that we've already established.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think what we just did, or what we're about to do, if we vote affirmative, is probably best practice, over the top, whatever. But I agree with you 100%. If he has a need.
However, when we approve the budget, we approve specific line
job
items in the
descriptions.
budget that are viewable, that we know who they are and we know what they're doing. So we are in fact approving a given budget that's set out in the front.
I guess I would argue that by saying,
We approve a staff, we don't approve every individual salary.
the budgets that have been put
No,
out,
it is.
they have had their salaries
It's not in the report
put
that
out.
way.
It's may not in the report, but it certainly is in the budget.
Okay, fair enough. I'm looking at the report. Tim just showed me the budget and it has separate lines. So I guess I would suggest that maybe the motion should be to allow Tim to just reallocate the money that was budgeted for
Reallocate money
whatever
within the budget.
training coordinator 2 towards a new position. So anyway, and then going forward in the future, just for argument's sake, I think that we should pass a budget for salaries, and then if something changes in mid-year, he can adapt and do that. He's an executive director of a pretty large organization. We don't need to micromanage this every time something changes mid-year. So, just my 2 cents.
I'll be happy to accept that as a friendly amendment.
Did you get that?
I hate when people ask me that. Terry, how could you lose that?
Kinda like a paramedic.
Nobody's asking for a read back.
Right.
Take that under advisement and at least think about if that's what we want. That's a pretty significant change for what we normally do in business, and this is not.
So we can discuss that when the budget comes around next time for approval, but
Actually, what I think would make a ton of sense, and Scott makes an extremely good argument on how Tim should be running this organization. And I think that's very, very reasonable. So we should actually hold that as a discussion item.
Right, I said-
when the budget comes forward, and make sure we don't pass it up. We need to allow Tim the opportunities to
Right.
run the organization and take care of personnel matters as they come up.
So for now, the offered amendment was simply to reallocate the money from training coordinator 2 and allow Tim to spend that as he needs to for a new position. Sound good, Jim?
Steve, you're the second.
It needs another second, though.
Have a second?
I second the amendment second motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion
Thank you.
carries. Thank you. Okay. Course sponsor renewals, Tim? Put in for Columbia?
2 more course sponsor renewals. I put these under new business because they just arrived here. Columbia County Ambulance Association, that needs Hudson Mohawk endorsement. And we also have a second one from Remo. We had I believe it's our specialty course sponsorship renewal that you guys all approved via email vote. Gene Taylor called Rich last week and said, I'd like to combo that with your long-term, or long-form renewal. Correct me, Mary, but I believe that's what it was there.
Right, the original one was the long form one.
And the other one was the specialty sponsor, whatever it was. So we have a second Remo course sponsorship that needs your approval tonight. So we need you guys to approve the Columbia County Ambulance Association sponsorship renewal and the second Remo sponsorship renewal.
Do we need to break them into 2 separate motions, or was one enough?
I have no idea.
I'll make a motion, we approve both.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Tim?
Yes.
If I may, along those same lines, I do not believe you've received all the core sponsor renewals that need to be approved by this body. Hudson Valley has one coming, the hyphenated guy with the ponytail,
Craig?
Fox.
That's Columbia County.
That's
Ambulance
Columbia County
Association.
Ambulance,
He had
yeah.
one, okay.
Yeah, that's this one. If Hudson Valley,
I can't keep track, I didn't know.
if Hudson Valley's is up this year, they need to
Hudson
get
Valley
it to
is-
me.
I can tell you who's on the list, that's why I'm saying, I'm trying to go through the list in my head. It was Hudson, because I sent reminder emails to everyone a couple weeks ago, like I sent to Rich Ruther.
Can you send me one tomorrow morning? I'll make sure I get a hold of Bob Phillips. If that's indeed the case, I'll make sure
They
he
were
gets
working
that
on
in
getting their
pronto.
documents together.
Can we do
But what I'm
Email.
saying is typically they approve or whatever for the summer, just to be sure they're covered.
Yeah, you can vote just like you did email, and then we'll read it into the record the next meeting. Like Anne Marie's gonna read into the record the initial REMSCO vote, or Remo approval from last month, so. You can approve it via email, we'll read it into the record in September. So.
Transfer to general fund as precautionary measure to offset operating costs. Under old business.
I got the one thing under new business now.
Okay.
The communication one. Okay, so now under new business, the communication plan. I'm gonna send around this handout. Jim asked the question, so what do we get from improving our communications, that I didn't answer it as well as I could have, so while the meeting's been going on, I've been thinking about it. There are some tangible benefits to this, and they come, number one, in the way we serve our main constituency, which is agencies and providers at agencies. One of the things that came up in our conversation is we bet that there are a whole bunch of agencies that don't pay any attention to anything they get from REMO, that perhaps they should, and that there are a whole bunch of individual providers that don't even know REMO exists. And maybe it's not relevant to them on a day-to-day life, but maybe it should be a resource to them. And then to our external audiences, we talked about how important our business surplus, our educational surplus is to our ability to operate. If we're better branded, if we're better marketed, it will lead to more customers that purchase our educational opportunities. So that just adds to the answer I gave before. So I've talked with Greenberg Public Relations and Stanhope Partners. These are two firms that I'm just handing out a one-pager on them that includes their client list. They're two of the most well-known public affairs and communications consultants in the Capital District. You can see they have clients all over New York State and worldwide. The reason I brought them to the table to talk to them about this is because they've done this exact same project for me on other places. I have no financial interest in their firms or anything like that. In meeting with them, it would be, we talked about it being a three-part proposal. Number one, them doing meetings with the staff to learn about what we do and how we communicate and do a communications audit. Then number two, doing meetings with the membership, meaning an invitational meeting where members can come or choose not to come, to audit, to get your opinions on how we communicate. And then number three, to give us recommendations so that we answer the three questions. How do we communicate now? How effective are we? And what are the options for improving communications? So those are the three things that they would be willing and interested in doing with us. They could do it over the summertime because the state legislature is not around, and it's kind of a decent time for them to work on the project, and maybe conclude it with coming to meet with us in September and or October. I'm estimating it's around 40 hours of labor that they'll put into it over that time period, and they can do it for not to exceed $5,000. So that's what I would like to bring forward as a proposal to contract with Greenberg Public Relations and Stanhope Partners. It'll be they basically each get half the money. So for not to exceed $5,000 to do the communications audit, work with the membership on effective communication, and then return a report on recommendations that we presented to the council on changes we can make in recommendations and make in communications.
So they're only gonna make recommendations, they're not gonna help us get there?
This is right. This is what you ought to do. They can help us get there, and some of the things that they can help us get there are no-cost items. But some of them, like we're not paying them to redesign. If they may recommend redesign your website this way, but they won't be redesigning the website. That would be, and that frankly, they're not web designers, so they can tell us what they think we can do, but you hire either our existing web designer or we contract with someone else. So I'll make it as a motion.
I'll second that.
So now we can talk about it.
Do you have a specific delineation of who would do what?
Yes, Steve Greenberg and Bob Belfiore would do it all.
No, but I mean, is there one firm that's, and it's just.
They're a team.
And you may not.
They're a team. They're bidding on this as a integrated team. So we would, basically, if it were 5,000, I'll try and negotiate the number a little bit lower perhaps, but if it were a $5,000 contract, they would each get $2,500. It would be 50-50 split.
I apologize, I didn't realize that's how it was.
Right, it's,
Misunderstood.
they work
Yeah.
together, they're not doing separate plans.
Contracted or whatever.
You'll see if you look on this client list, they have common, clients, and if you look on their website, they actually refer to each, they talk about the strategic partnership. They both bring good strengths, and so the synergy is very good. They also do a lot of, if you ever watch Capital Tonight, these two guys are called the Insiders. One night a week, they, on Capital Tonight, the political TV news show at Time Warner, they like debate back and forth, because one of them's a Republican, one's a Democrat, about, happenings in state government.
We're paying them about $60 an hour is what I'm telling, figuring out. If they're about 40 hours. We're paying them
Well, I think it's 40 total, I think it's 40 total, so you're about $100.
So we're
an hour.
about $120 an hour,
Yeah.
that's an awful lot of money to pay.
I actually
For
thought,
their opinion.
I actually thought it was cheap, because I was thinking we were looking at $200 an hour, give or take.
I think
So
it's about,
I thought it was actually kinda cheap.
I think it's about market rate, but for what we're getting, but, obviously I bring it forward knowing it's an expensive project and that you guys have to, think about if you think it's worth that kind of money.
I think we're here to serve a constituency, regardless of who you think that constituency is. And I think that we are probably vastly underserving each of those constituencies. I think we spent a lot of time in that meeting last week, or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, going through all these different people that we should be communicating with. And I don't think any of us at any point thought we're doing a really good job communicating with X. And, I mentioned this before with the education piece, that we continue to accumulate funds and we keep putting them away, and we're not spending that money to serve the people that we need to be serving. And I don't think we know exactly who we need to be serving or how unless we can communicate with them. And I think this is a very important piece of it. And frankly, I wish that I was gonna make $5,000, but in the big scheme of things, I don't think $5,000 is a whole lot of money. I could use it.
We also discussed in the meeting, the possibility of being able to address most of these items inside the council themselves. Steve did a spectacular job getting up on the whiteboard and helping us focus what we need to do. But I also noticed that Tim was very surprised and writing like a son of a gun because of all the ideas that we were spitting out, that you were like, well, this is wonderful, folks, no one's told me any of these ideas. I think $5,000 is a lot to spend just to come back with ideas, not actual work. Something to think about.
I think actually having somebody that's gonna organize those ideas is important. Scott talks about, I'd love $5,000, and frankly, $5,000 sounds like a nice payday. But the reality is that what we're looking for here is a specific skill set. And these guys clearly have the chops. They have the skill set, and because of that, the amount of time they'll spend coming up with that same pathway will probably be much more brief. So I suspect that the value we will get for that money will be well spent. My initial idea when I first heard about this was to see whether or not we could do this as an educational project in concert with one of the local schools. I think we're in a position right now where we have enough opportunities we can bring to bear for local education. This isn't one of them. We have the cash. We should develop a comprehensive communication plan. These guys have got the skill set to do that. And frankly, I would say let's encumber the money to that end, and have Steve and Tim work on getting this plan accomplished.
Any other discussion? Need to vote? We have a motion?
It was
We have a
already
motion
made
and
and
a
seconded.
second.
That was the discussion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion carries.